I find it incredibly fascinating how perception shapes all of our experiences. And I think this applies very much to what's going on in the world right now. I think we're all seeing the world change very visibly, but I think it just applies to life in general. As a kid, I recall thinking about how strange it was to me that different people could go through essentially the same experiences together and walk away with such different outlooks and takeaways. You know, you could take any example of anything. It could be a dinner party or something, right? And everybody's there having the same food, they're partaking in the same conversations, listening to the same music or whatever, right? And yet they can walk away with completely different reviews of the experience, if it went well or if it didn't. I'm sharing all this background as context really because that kind of line of thinking has led me to believe that we are all living in our own worlds. The sum of my experiences, my past experiences, my memories, my upbringing, my biology, everything is such that my perception of the world is unique. Nobody else has the exact same equation that I do. And I find it incredibly interesting to think that, okay, maybe we're all living in our own worlds, and that shows the power that the mind has to create the worlds that we live in. I don't know if this is an idea that's already out there, that has an official name already, but I'm going to give just a concrete example essentially to illustrate the point I'm trying to make here. I've had a lot of time to think over the last few weeks as I just moved here to France, and currently we are in a quarantine, and much of the world economy has halted. And so, I don't know, I've had this strange contrast between my life right now and my life just about a month ago when I initially arrived to this country. I came here with this idea of creating a life here and meeting people and, I don't know, having that sense of community and creating a life here essentially. Like, I had spent so much time thinking about it and creating this like fantasy that I was getting very excited about. It's something that I do every time I move to a new country because, I don't know, it kind of helps me in many ways to counter the difficulties that you inevitably face when you arrive in a new country. It's not easy to start over from zero again and be in a foreign place where you don't know the people, and everything, even the simplest things, are more difficult. So having this fantasy and this excitement to integrate myself in a new place always helps me. That being said, I have seen now the contrast between that world that I created in my mind that I was so excited about and the world that I am now living in, which much of that is no longer possible. I can't go out and enjoy the beautiful spring weather right now, meeting people, getting coffees or whatever, being invited to parties or anything, just living a social life. And so I'm at this point right now where I have a decision, really, which is I can choose to continue living in that world that I created for myself in my mind, that world that I wish in many ways I were living, which is enjoying a social life and meeting French people or people of any nationality really that live here in Paris, and continuing down that path, which objectively we can say is no longer possible. Or I can choose to live in the world that I find myself in right now and adapt to it, but also place my focus and energy on where things are at right now in the hopes of potentially shaping my world moving forward into the future. At some level, I feel like this applies to everybody in every situation imaginable. I mean, you always have the choice to choose the world that you are living in. What I was describing, that life that I thought I was going to be living and very much in many ways wish I were living, right? I would love for things to return to normality, is in a sense denial. It's a denial of what's going on right now to continue to live in that world. And I think it's interesting how powerful and how seductive the worlds that we create in our own minds are. You can easily get swept away into that, and I find that I often do. I get swept away into the worlds that I create for myself. So I'm not sure there is necessarily like a concrete conclusion to this series of thoughts, but it's just something I'm observing right now and that I find very interesting and very applicable to what's going on right now. A lot of people are making calls for a quick return to life as it was before. But I don't think that's possible. I think changes are happening right now that will have an impact on everything that we do moving forward. And so we have a decision to make, which is, do we choose to continue living in that idea that we had, that world that we created for ourselves of returning back to whatever normal is? Or do we now focus on this new world that we live in and adapt and place our energy there? Ultimately, I'm not sure I'm qualified to give any sort of advice. I just think it's fascinating, once again, how much perception shapes all of our experiences. And all I'm trying to do right now is pay as much attention as possible.